Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. Today is a very exciting day because I'm going to be starting the very first seeds of the year. I let the chickens out to free range. You might be able to see them in the background here and there. And it's a really nice day out, so I think it's the perfect day to be starting off the gardening season. So it's the middle of January right now, and today I'm going to be starting mostly alliums and some herbs. So let me go over all of the seeds that I brought out. So for my onions and other alliums, these are the varieties I'm going to be starting. Australian Brown, Sierra Blanca, Cabernet Red Onions, Calibra Yellow Onions, and then I also have Zebrune Shallots, and then two kinds of leeks. I have King Richard leeks, and then also Giant Musselburgh leeks. So some of these I have tried before, and some of these are new this year. And for the onions, I think they're all intermediate day onions because that's what we need to grow for our latitude. And if you're not sure what I mean by that, I kind of went over it in a recent video. It was the seed haul video where I explained the difference between short, medium, and long day onions. And then I also pulled out a couple of herbs. I'm going to be starting thyme and also lemongrass. But this is also a great time to start other woody herbs like sage, probably oregano as well. It's kind of bright this way, I'm gonna have to shield my eyes. I used to also start celery around this time, but I'm gonna be skipping that this year. It's just a lot of work and we only grow a few plants. So I don't mind just buying celery from the grocery store. We're just gonna skip that this year. This is also a good time to start other woody herbs like oregano and sage. And the reason I like to start a lot of my onions from seeds is because you can get a lot of onion seeds in a packet and start a lot of plants that way. You also have more control over the varieties. So again, those short, medium, or long day onions, you get to choose the ones that are best for your area that will produce a nice bulb. And also, I just really like how onions you start really early on. Like I said, it's the middle of January, and these are the first seeds I'm starting for the year. So it's always really nice to kind of just have a gardening project again in the middle of the winter. And from January until when we plant them, which is going to be probably around March, the onions don't require a lot of work. They don't take up a lot of space at all, and I'll be able to start hundreds if not thousands of onion seeds in a very small space. So I love that about them, and let me show you how I'm going to be starting them this year. The chickens, by the way, are like right next to me by our back door. They've actually never come this close to the house before, but we've been letting them free range a lot, so I think they've just been inching like closer and closer to the house as they explore. So here is what I pulled out to start the seeds today. Instead of using like official seed starting supplies, I'm just using repurposed food containers, just like little plastic containers like you would get lettuce or other kinds of prepared foods. And I am not poking holes at the bottoms of these, so I'm just gonna leave them intact. And I like this for starting indoors, especially early on when I don't have a lot of seeds inside, because I feel like it's just less messy. I don't have to deal with multiple trays, and I'll just be really mindful to not overwater since they don't have drainage holes. I'm only going to water enough. I'm only going to water enough to moisten the soil and make sure it's not soaking wet. So I'm okay with just being a little more mindful of that and using these types of containers. And I'm also going to do multiple varieties in each container. So in this big container, I'm doing 4 different onion varieties, and I'm just gonna separate them by like leaving a little space in between each of them, and I'll do like thick bands. And you'll see when I sow these, you really don't need a lot of space in between the seeds, so you can really start a huge amount of onions in a very small space. I'm going to fill my containers with some moist potting soil. This is just normal bagged potting soil, nothing special, and not special seed starting mix either. And I like to pre-moisten this so that I don't have to water it later on, because if I add water after I sow the seeds and before they've developed any roots, then they can kind of get washed away and displaced. And this way I can be sure that everything is evenly wet and the seeds will have a nice humid environment to germinate in. And I don't know that I really explained very well before why I'm using these containers, so I'll just try it again. But basically, if you have like a usual seed starting container that has individual cells, or if you have individual pots and they all have holes at the bottom, usually you'll have to put these in a second tray that will catch any excess water or that you can bottom water with. So you would need to have like a pot or a tray within a tray. And also with those containers, since you usually have individual cells that are maybe a few inches wide, I would have to do multiple cells of each kind of onion variety that I'm wanting to grow, and I don't necessarily need them to be in separate cells. You'll see that when I sow these, I'm just going to really like mass sow these almost and do a nice thick layer of onion seeds, and they will grow up really close to each other. It will almost look like grass seedlings. They'll be all intermingled, and I don't need them to be in individual cells for them to grow that way. So anyway, I have finished filling up my pots with the moist potting soil, and I've sort of tried to like flatten out that top layer just so that the seeds will not like fall to one side and there's a nice even layer for me to sprinkle them on. And then what I've done is I've just taken some old popsicle sticks and I've made kind of like these dividers in each of my containers, and this will separate the different types of varieties of onions that I'm going to plant. So for this first larger container, I'm doing 4 varieties of onions, and I'm just going to take some masking tape and label them on the front of the container. And I also really like using repurposed containers like this because it means that I don't have to wash out my seed starting trays, which honestly I do not really like doing. It's kind of an annoying chore, especially when it's still really cold out and I don't really want to like be dealing with really cold hose water that will make my hands really cold. So that's definitely a plus. You don't need to sanitize or wash anything. I can just use these repurposed containers and feel really good that I've given them another life before they go into the recycling bin. So then I'm going to take each variety of onions and really sprinkle a lot of seeds in each of the little sections that I've divided out. I know it's kind of hard to see because they're small black seeds going onto black soil, but hopefully you can get an idea based on like how many seeds I'm pouring out into my hand for each of these areas. It's definitely a lot of seeds for that small area, and I'm making sure that I'm especially sowing very heavily for the seeds that I have extras of from last year. The germination rate of onion seeds go down a lot as time goes on. They are one of the seeds that you really want to use within a few years. So any seeds that I have that I purchased last year and not recently this winter, I'm making sure to put in an extra like 30 to 50% of seeds just in case the germination rate is a little bit lower. So back to what I was talking about before, which is why I choose to grow onions in these really large blocks of soil rather than in individual cells. First of all, they will obviously take up less space this way, and when I go to plant the onions, the roots don't really tangle up very much when they're young, so they're very easy to separate later on, and I don't have to worry about separating them out as they grow. Onion seedlings grow very slowly, which is why we're doing this all the way in the middle of January, like 12 to 13 weeks before our last frost date. They'll take a really long time to actually develop any thickness to the stem, and I don't find that I usually have to pot up my onions to a larger pot at all, even though I'm starting them in a very crowded space. I'm just going to lightly cover my seeds with a thin layer of that same moist potting soil, and I'm not going to have to water this since the soil has so much moisture in it already. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll put some sort of plastic dome on top of this just to keep the humidity up while the seeds are germinating, and the seeds should sprout in maybe like 5 to 7 days. So I'm just going to repeat that same process for my other smaller container. In this container, I'm putting my shallots and my 2 kinds of leeks in here. I did grow these shallots last year and I really enjoyed them. Shallots are a little bit on the smaller side, but what's really nice about them is that they store really well. These shallots stored longer than any of the onions that I grew, so they were the last thing that I used up, and they were still looking great even when all of my other onions had started to sprout and go soft. The last seeds that I'm going to sow are my thyme and lemongrass seeds, and I have these two really cute little containers for them. And I'm really just going to do the same thing. I'm going to scatter a ton of seeds on each of these. The thyme grows so slowly and the plants are so small that I would rather have more seeds just so that I could have kind of like a bushier plant. And the lemongrass, what I usually do is I will plant one pot or one cell like this, and it will grow as a clump, and then when I go to plant it, I can divide it into 2 or maybe 3 different clumps and have some separate patches of lemongrass. I'm going to lightly cover the lemongrass seeds with some soil, but since the thyme seeds are so small, I'm not going to cover those at all. I'm just going to press the seeds down into the soil so they have nice contact. While I had my soil out and I was already outside getting my hands dirty, I also decided to start some microgreens just so that we could have some greens to eat in the winter since we don't really have any greens from the garden right now. Microgreens are always a really great thing to grow and they're so satisfying because they grow so quickly. So I have this really shallow container that is perfect for microgreens because they really don't take much soil since you're harvesting them after like maybe a week. So you don't want to waste money on soil when you don't need to on like a really deep container. So this shallow one was perfect. It was probably like ½ an inch of soil, which is going to be great for this. And I'm actually using alfalfa seeds that I bought for sprouting, but we don't like sprouts as much as we like microgreens. So I've been using them for microgreens instead, and they are great for this. And for microgreens, I want to sow a very thick layer, almost covering the surface of the soil, so you can get a really dense blanket of microgreens. And I'm not going to cover these at all, and we'll be able to harvest those in about a week. Here is everything that I started today all together. Those are gonna go inside to germinate where it's nice and warm, and then once everything comes up, I'm gonna put them under grow lights, and I'm gonna run those for 12 hours a day. You don't wanna do too much for onion seedlings because you don't want them to start forming a bulb too quickly. So that's going to be it for today. I'm so excited to have the first seeds of the year in some soil and get this gardening season off to a great start. In the meantime, enjoy this footage of our chickens being adorable and following Aaron around. We like to think it's because they love us, but we really know it's just because they want treats. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you again in the next one.